coming tonight. This is just so overwhelming, and I'm so appreciative that you would come out to see my work. I think probably the first thing that I would say is that I have always been extremely fascinated with light, and that started when I was a young child. You know, the verse, when the Lord God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and he separated the light from the darkness, and he saw that the light was good. That to me was so pivotal, and that most of my work, in the early part of my work, was all black and white. Which, when you look at this, then it's just like, how did this come about? But I did. I would really examine light, shadows, and I would paint things like windows and doors, and light coming through the window, and light coming through the doors, and light, how I would draw with a pencil. And that was just one of those things I did. I hated colored pencils when I would draw, but I would use charcoal, or I would just use a pencil, and I would just color, and I would draw with an eraser. I would just pull that light out with a pencil. And when I went to graduate school, which Coy and I did overlap like a couple of semesters when I was in graduate school, and I was such a wonderful fan of his work and his colors. But in fact, Coy is really nice in letting me text him every now and then and ask him, "How did you get this color?" But that's a nice community of artists there for you. But when I got into graduate school, I did begin painting just lights. I would just paint light, like I said, windows, doors. And then I would paint things like actual lights, like chandeliers. And I would take these restaurants that were lighted with chandeliers, and I would paint that and how it looked on the fold, and and they were very dark paintings. And but I began to explore as I moved further in my exploration and my examination of light. I began to look at how the colors. I would set up these little still lifes, and I would shine flashlights into them. And being from Louisiana, Mardi Gras was always my favorite season, and I've got some Louisiana people here, and they know exactly what that means. But I would take Mardi Gras beads, and I would take mirrors, and I would shine lights on them, and I would put them in these little still life settings, and I would start to look at how the light would distort and how it would break down. And so I started adding little bits of color. And I have to say that that color, as I continued that examination of how light would move and how light would distort, turned into saturated, just these vibrant saturated colors. I would take the pictures and I would photograph my still lifes, and I would take those photographs and I would saturate them on my little Photoshop, and I would say, "Oh, I love that," and then it would be like, "What is that?" And so I started cropping and everything, and so that's kind of how I came from black and white to color. And if you look at my website, I have quite a few of those black and white pieces on my website. So the breakdown of light, to me, what I do in my paintings is I'm breaking down what I consider visible light. I do not you will notice, and most of them you can, although there's probably one or two that may have lights in them, but I leave my light sources very ambiguous. And so, because I don't really want it to be about the light, I want it to be about the color and the shapes and what's going on in the canvas. And so, the first thing that I do is that I keep the light ambiguous as far as where it's entering, what's providing the light, because I want that light to emanate within, and I want it to draw you in. I want the colors, there's matte colors, there's transparent colors. I want all of those to work together. So I keep those light sources very ambiguous as far as what is being lighted, how it's being lighted, and things like that. Color for me, when I use color, I'm using it for lots of reasons, but probably one of the biggest things is that, to me, when it breaks down into color, that what happens is that color kind of takes on a life of its own in my paintings. So when I begin painting, I don't really plan my colors, even though I may have an image that I've taken. I don't really plan all of the colors because I want a lot of surprise. And that's what I put on the canvas, is a lot of surprise in those colors and how I butt them up against each other and how I use the matte and the transparent, translucent colors. So that one of the underlying things is that color gives it this underlying life, this pulse, so that you don't really know where it's coming from, but there's this life in the painting. The other thing is I'm very object-oriented in my work, and it's when I say object-oriented that I like to have something that I'm looking at, and so this actually, a lot of this series happened to be Mardi Gras beads and swans, and they were clear glass swans and all different color, multicolored Mardi Gras beads actually. And so, but I use that only as an anchor for the jumping off place. It's not like, oh, this is about a swan or this is about beads or anything like that. It's really just kind of my anchor and my jumping off point to just kind of paint from that place. And so I don't use the objects as a narrative or anything like that. The object just is not the focus at all, even though you can see usually some form of recognition of an object in most of the work that I have. There's always something that you can recognize in my paintings. I compress space in my paintings. I do that for a very special reason, is because that compression of space, when I throw something that large into your face, then it really is kind of an intimate observation at that point. But when I throw something that large onto the canvas, it provides a lot of area for me to start breaking that light down into colors and movement and everything. And so that compression of space, for me, represents a time kind of thing. There's this past, present, future going on, but it's always in the present. And so I like that you don't really know kind of where the background, where the foreground, and where the middle ground is. It's just like this continuous now. This is all happening right now. However, there are hints that there is a background and that there is a past in it. There are hints that there is a future when you can see through something. I'm trying to take you into a place where you're looking beyond the painting. You're looking into something beyond, and that kind of evokes this idea of eternity and immortality when you're able to look beyond or through. That's kind of a little bit about time in my work. I think the other thing that is a big deal for me in painting is I use color for movement rather than stroke. Of course, you can see some of my paintings are strokes, they're of a refinement, and some of them are not. But I use that color to come forward, I use that color to move back, I use that color to move your eyes around, and I use shapes to do the same things, because when I start breaking that light down into colors, they break down into shapes, and I use those shapes to kind of move you through the painting. I like to use color emotively, and certainly when you look at my paintings, they're very vibrant. So some are very, according to the colors that I choose, some are very tender. Probably, I would say, like the one down here, Coalesce, where the two swans are together, a very tender use of the color and the object. So those are a couple of things about that. Why do I do it? Why do I paint this way? is one of the questions that I ask myself a lot when I'm painting. And it's because I'm always pushing for a new perception, a new way of looking at things. And when I begin to break down and distort, one of the things that I find out is that when I'm painting, I can only see just a small area of the work when it's large. When I move back, then the image comes back. And so every time that you move into the painting and you move away from it, that you're getting new information from the painting. I always think of Carrie James Marshall, African-American artist, and one of the things that I love that he would say is that he talked about the long look. That paintings, that there's a long look to looking at art that's getting new information every time you come in and you move away. And I like that. And I like that about when I'm painting, it does the same thing for me. Because when I'm painting up close, and I will say that these, even in the large ones, you can see it more, but you say, how in the world do you do that when you're painting in a small space? But it's the same thing for me, because when I'm painting up close, I'm only seeing just those little shapes. But when I move away, then things come back, and I say, oh yeah, that's what that was, you know. And so each time you move in and move away, you're gathering more information from it. New perceptions. The thing I like about new perceptions is something that's not just an application to my painting, but I think it's kind of one of those things in life that we learn that, you know, every time you look at something and you look at it again, you come away with more information and more understanding, hopefully, in life, but more understanding. And so I always like to push. I just like pushing pushing that new perception of things. And so, I mean, I abstract for that reason. I mean, I could paint a swan and you would say, oh, that's a swan. But if I paint it in a different way, then you have to look at it in a new and different way. And I think that that's something that we can all apply to not only art, but everyday life. So I think that's about it as far as my work goes. Can I? A couple of things that I did want to include was that I am a nurse, and that I've spent the majority of my career as a nurse. And it's kind of funny that you think, how, you know, do you put the two together? And but I did. There was a period of time where I could not really have the opportunity to be in art school. And when we moved to Tyler, I didn't know anyone. And I thought, I just want some people like me. And I wanted to meet a group and a community, and so I went to UT Tyler, and I did. I met this wonderful community of artists, and so that kind of became my community since I had left my nursing community, which I have my UT community here, and I have a nurse from my dear friend that was a nurse with me for many years in the ICU. And but even when I was a nurse, I was still so fascinated with light that before visiting hours, and I worked in an ICU, and most of my patients did not talk, and they were most of the time on ventilators and things like that, because it was a very high acuity ICU. We didn't really have a lot of walkie-talkie patients. But what I would do is I would stand at the doorway, and this just goes to show you how you just are who you are. I would stand at the doorway, and I would flip the lights on, and I would flip the lights off. And I would pull the curtains, just so that when the family came in, the light was perfect, so that they wouldn't be scared. I didn't want them to be afraid, you know, when they came in and saw this horrible things attached to their family. And so I was using light, even artistically, as a nurse at that point in time, and not even realizing it. And I was analyzing light, which, you know, to me has just been one of those lifelong things and lifelong loves. I was always analyzing the effect that light would have. And I would flip different switches, and I would have lights above the bed, and I was just making sure everything was perfect, so that when that family came in, so that the light illuminated what needed to be seen and maybe hid what didn't. So that's just for some of you who are not art majors. Just a little tidbit that you are who you are, and and I love light, and I used it in nursing, and I love painting it now. I just love breaking it down and painting it now. So, any questions for me?
I have a question. Okay, when you said that you don't really plan, but do you have a vision? I mean, when you have that blank canvas in front of you, do you just pick something and then you just kind of mess around with it and then it forms, or?
No, I do have an anchor. I said I'm very object based, and so I always have an anchor because I use my camera, and I use photographs that I use as an anchor. So that is what I look at to begin. And I will map out that. But then after that, I put the photograph away, and then I just paint. And then I just let the shapes come in and the colors come in like I feel like they should, and then reaching that point where you think, okay, all the colors are here, peace out. Time to stop.
Is it hard for you to stop?
Yes. And the reason is because I will work something to death, including my poor husband. But yes, sometimes I have to say, this is finished, don't touch it. And you know what I usually do is I go and hang it somewhere away from where I'm painting. Because if it's anywhere near where I'm painting, then I'm gonna say, oh my goodness, it needs, and so yes, sometimes it is hard for me, and I have to, I think I'm better than I was, and I think Mary probably can attest to that. But yes, I can overwork something. It's hard to find a place to say, okay, but yeah. Anything else?
Do you still create pieces in black and white, or have you completely moved on to color?
I do, but not as much. I will use my black and white on my camera a lot of times, and this is just an art tidbit for students. I will use that black and white on my camera a lot of times to see whether or not I've got enough light and dark in the painting. I mean, that's just something I do. But as far as drawing and paint, I haven't painted as much as dark. Probably one of the pieces down here called Fractured is a really dark work. And then probably one of this one right here, one of the small ones, began as a very dark painting. And the funny thing is that most painters begin with light, and you would think if I'm painting light that I would begin with light, and I don't. I paint my darks in first, and then I add my light, which means that sometimes I'm overpaint. I have to use my titanium white that will cover a lot because I did that, but that's how I work.
Well, Brad actually had a question related to that.
Okay.
She wanted to know, do you always leave a little bit of the pure white in the painting? And if so,
Of the canvas showing?
not necessarily the canvas, but just like these areas of light? Or
I love to use white. And for a long time, because I did white and black, so much white and black, that I had to move away from white. And the reason is because I was using it as a crutch. And so I kind of threw my white tube away. I didn't throw it away, I just put it away. But yes, I do. I do like to put those white places in. And, because I think it's a nice place for the eye to rest for a few minutes when it's on that white. So I love to use white spaces, and I've tried to incorporate more of those white spaces because I think they counteract the dark, spaces. They contrast well with the darker, but, okay. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that I didn't know there was an object really in it until you said that. Because that wasn't what drew me at first. It was the way the shape saw it. And then when you said it, it's like I said, I stand back and now I see it really clear in all of them. But the first thing you notice is the vibrancy. That I just love them.
They're meant to be very playful, very childlike, even though they're complex. I mean, I'm not saying that, they're complex, but they're meant to be playful. They're meant to call forth that innocence of childhood, and that way, without any preconceived perceptions. Sometimes I think if we can get back to that innocence, then we can change how we look at things when we've broken down those barriers of perception. So anyway, anything else? More questions? Aha!
So whenever you were a nurse, did you ever have to paint, and what made you decide to go blue to art?
Whatever made me decide to move into art. When I was a nurse, I went into nursing. I still remember the day I called my dad and I said, "Dad, I'm changing my major," and he was like, "Oh," And I said, "I'm going into nursing," and he was like, "Oh, okay," because my grandmother was a nurse. So he was like, "Oh, okay," And but I at the time I did it that. I had actually just gone through a divorce and I had a young son, and I needed a way to make a living, honestly. And so I changed my major to nursing and finished in nursing, and then went straight to work. And I worked a year in a medical floor, and then went straight to the SICU. And but when I was in nursing, I would go back and take classes. And what I would do is because I could not commit to a college class, because inevitably I would sign up for these classes, my boss would say, "Yes, you can leave," or "Yes, you can have this day off." Never happened. So what I ended up doing, and I would have to drop them, but because I wanted to take my art and go ahead and finish my art degree. So what I would do is I would take community art classes. And so because they would meet later in the evening a lot of time to accommodate people's work schedules, and or Saturdays or Sundays or something like that. And so I would take community art classes during that time. Only until we moved to Tyler, which we've been here for almost 14 years, did I end up going back, because by that time I had been a nurse for a very long time, and I was better able to manipulate my schedule, and so that I could have the consistent days off to be there. And but I always took either community classes, drawing classes, paint classes, and Tyler or Longview and Kilgore, I'm sure, has the same thing, the community education, or if there, somebody would be teaching a class, and just kind of things like that. Drawing nights is really nice, if you have drawing nights where you can just go in and draw and things like that. So I continued doing that. It was just until we moved to Tyler that I was actually able to, and the reason is because when we moved here, there was an art school. There was, an art program. A lot of the places we lived didn't have a fine arts program, so I didn't have that. So Kilgore, y'all are very lucky in that you have an art program here. UT has an art program here, and it's all in such close proximity that you can benefit from those things. So, did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Well, these are good questions.